The first sound was not laughter. It was a cry that did not belong to the newborn child, but to the woman who had waited so long that hope had turned into something sharp, something she dared not touch anymore. For anyone who saw Sarah fall to her knees that morning, clutching the edge of her tent with trembling fingers, it would have seemed like grief. But sometimes joy breaks a person exactly the way sorrow does. And no one understood this better than Abraham. Standing outside, hands shaking, hearing the impossible become real. But before the cry of joy, before the miracle's weight hit the earth like thunder, there was a moment when Sarah thought everything had been a lie. A moment so heavy it felt like disappointment was breathing against her neck again, whispering that her story had been closed long before this day. It began one night when Abraham stepped out under the stars, the very stars God once told him to count. He didn't try counting this time. He couldn't. All he could do was whisper into the silence, "Lord, is it still coming?" Because he was old now, older than a promise should allow. And Sarah, who once walked with the confidence of queen, now moved slowly, as though each year had pinned another stone to her spine. Then came that whisper from heaven. Not thunder, not fire, just a soft certainty of a voice that had never lied. At the appointed time, she will bear a son. Abraham told Sarah, but she didn't stand tall. She didn't smile. She laughed, a tired, cracked laugh that wasn't humor at all. A laugh that meant, "I want to believe you, but I cannot afford another heartbreak." Yet even as she laughed, God answered, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Still months passed, and then more months, and the silence grew awful, and then the morning arrived. Sarah felt something unusual, something she had never felt before, a pressure deep inside her ribs, like her own body was waking up from a lifetime of sleep. She pressed a hand to her stomach. It was not pain. It was movement. Abraham rushed to her side. The servants whispered, and the promise that had stretched across decades suddenly snapped into the present. And the cry that echoed through the camp was the sound of a woman who had waited far too long. But this is not where the story ends. Through the chaos of that morning, when the tent filled with midwives and Abraham paced the ground until he carved a path into the dust, Sarah held on. And when the moment came, she delivered the son she had once believed she would never hold. Abraham lifted the child, his miracle, with hands that trembled like a man holding something holy. The boy's first breath was small, but strong. His first wail climbed into the air like a declaration. Sarah watched Abraham's face soften in a way she had never seen. And in that moment she understood why God had waited, why it stretched her hope until it almost broke. Because miracles hit harder when they arrive late. They named him Isaac, meaning laughter, but not the bitter laugh of disbelief. This was a sound of restoration, of joy returned, of tears finally drying after years of being buried in the heart. Yet as the camp celebrated, Abraham noticed something Sarah did not. Hagar stood far back, almost invisible, watching with hollow eyes. Ishmael beside her, older now, strong, but visibly wounded by the distance that had grown between his father and himself. He watched the new baby with something deeper than jealousy, something closer to fear. Because Ishmael knew the truth long before Sarah would. Isaac wasn't just a child. Isaac was a fulfillment, and fulfilled promises change everything. As time passed, a whisper that should never have reached Abraham's ears, a whisper that would undo 40 years of waiting, longing, and believing, a whisper that felt like the sky itself cracking open. "Take your son." The words echoed through the night in a tremble he could not escape. Abraham had heard the voice of the Lord before, in Ur in Haran, beneath unfamiliar stars and on lonely roads, but never like this, never with a command that pierced the heart like a knife. "Take your son, your only son, whom you love." For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Isaac was the laughter of his old age, the miracle no one believed would ever come. He was a living proof that God keeps impossible promises. And yet, as the wind howled across the tents of Beersheba, Abraham felt the ground shift beneath him. How could the Lord ask this of him? How could the God who promised Isaac now require him? But the voice did not tremble. It did not negotiate. It carved itself into Abraham's soul with a calm that terrified him. Go to the region of Moriah. Offer him there. Abraham pressed his forehead into the dirt, his hands trembling. He did not argue. He did not beg. The silence of his obedience was louder than any scream he could have given. He stood only when the night had nearly ended. Sarah slept gently inside the tent, unaware. Isaac, their beautiful boy, lay across the room, one arm above his head, the way he always slept when he was dreaming. Abraham watched him for a long time. If he blinked, he feared he might break. If he touched him, he feared he might refuse. He finally whispered a prayer into the dark. "Lord, be merciful to me." Morning came too quickly. Abraham woke Isaac with a smile that hurt to hold. "We are going to worship," he said. "Come with me." Isaac, 15, strong, curious, everything Abraham once prayed for, rose without hesitation. His eyes were bright as always. He did not know that every step he took was tearing his father apart. Abraham split the wood himself. Each strike of his axe felt like a betrayal. Each piece that fell to the ground sounded like God's promise shattering. He saddled the donkey. He called the servants. He carried the fire. Isaac carried the wood. And Abraham carried the grief that threatened to drown him. The journey lasted 3 days. 3 days of long silences, stolen glances, and whispered prayers Abraham didn't know how to finish. Isaac talked about the sheep, the stars, the taste of the figs Sarah prepared that morning. But Abraham answered only half of what he heard. On the 3rd morning, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the mountain. His legs weakened beneath him. "We will continue from here," he told the servants. "Stay with the donkey. We will return to you." It was the most desperate sentence Abraham had ever spoken. He didn't know if it was hope or denial. Isaac walked beside him, the wood strapped to his back. The boy noticed a heaviness in his father's steps. He noticed the silence, too. "Father," he asked gently. Abraham swallowed hard. "Yes, my son. We have fire and wood, but where's the lamb?" Abraham's breath caught. The world slowed. Every bird in the sky seemed to stop mid-flight. He looked at Isaac, the boy who trusted him without question, and managed to whisper, "God will provide for himself the lamb." Isaac accepted the answer because Abraham had never lied to him. They climbed. Wind roared. Dust stung their faces. Abraham's heart pounded like a drum inside his chest. He tried not to think. He tried not to feel. He tried to remember the God who had walked with him since the day he left everything behind. They reached the top. Abraham built the altar with trembling hands, placing each stone with the precision of a man delaying the inevitable. Isaac stacked the wood neatly, waiting for the lamb that never appeared. Then the moment came, the moment Abraham had prayed would never arrive. "Isaac," he whispered, voice breaking. The boy turned. His eyes were full of trust, not fear. "Father?" Abraham's hand shook violently as he reached for him. He could not hide the tears anymore. Isaac saw them. Confusion spread across his face. "Father, what is it?" Abraham's voice cracked like dry ground. "My son, the Lord requires you." For a brief moment, Isaac froze. The shock washed over him in silence. His face tightened, not in rebellion, but in heartbreak. He understood. Somehow he understood. His voice trembled. If God has asked us, then I will obey." Abraham fell to his knees. Isaac knelt beside him and embraced him. Neither spoke. Their tears mingled in the dust of the altar. Abraham tied the bindings with shaking hands, whispering apologies through every knot. Isaac did not resist. He lay upon the wood with closed eyes, his chest rising and falling in slow, frightened breaths. Abraham picked up the knife. His arm felt carved from stone. The metal trembled above the boy he loved more than his own life. His heart pounded so violently he thought it might burst. He tried to speak a final blessing over Isaac, but no words formed. He raised the blade. "Abraham! Abraham!" The voice thundered from heaven and split the world in two. Abraham dropped the knife. His knees collapsed beneath him. Isaac gasped as if life had returned to him in a rush. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," the angel cried. "Now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Abraham's sob shook the mountain. He lifted his eyes and saw a ram caught in the thicket. Relief overwhelmed him. He untied Isaac with trembling hands, pulling him into an embrace so tight Isaac could barely breathe. Isaac wept against his father's chest, clutching him as if he might disappear. Abraham offered a ram instead. His hands did not shake this time. His heart felt like it had been broken, only to be remade. The smoke rose into the morning sky. Isaac watched it quietly, a boy forever changed. Abraham touched his shoulder gently. Neither spoke. Some moments were too sacred for words. But as they descended the mountain, Isaac kept glancing back at the place where he had almost died and where he had learned the way to faith. Abraham looked back too. He knew something had shifted forever. Isaac had been spared. But this would not be the last time God required something unthinkable. A promise this great always came with a cost. And somewhere deep inside, Abraham sensed that part of the story had only just begun. The moment Isaac returned from the altar, the world felt different, quieter, heavier, as if heaven itself was holding its breath. Abraham had passed the unthinkable test. And although the boy's life was never taken, something still died that day. Isaac's childhood innocence, Abraham's old certainty, the unbroken silence between heaven and earth. People imagined the walk home must have been triumphant, but it wasn't. Abraham walked slowly, leaning on his staff, his hands shaking with the weight of everything he had almost done. Isaac walked beside him, close enough to touch, but not touching. His face was pale, lips tightened, eyes still shimmering with the memory of rope against the skin, and his father's trembling hands lifting a knife. He wanted to ask questions, but every time he opened his mouth, the words collapsed under the weight of what they had shared. And Abraham knew he deserved that silence. When they finally stepped back into camp, Sarah rushed forward with a joy that carried no suspicion. She grabbed Isaac, pulling him tightly into her arms, whispering how she prayed every moment they were away. Isaac buried his face in her shoulder. He had always loved his mother's embrace. Now it felt like the only safe place left in the world. But Sarah saw something, a flicker in Isaac's eyes, a shadow in Abraham's. She didn't know what happened on the mountain, but she knew there had been a price paid that she had not been there to witness. Later that night, Abraham stood alone outside his tent. The stars looked sharper than usual. Heaven felt close, too close. He lifted his face and whispered into the empty sky, "Lord, I did as you asked, but do you understand what you asked of me?" He expected silence. Instead, a wind moved through the camp, soft, warm, unmistakably alive. It brushed Abraham's shoulders like a hand. And deep within his spirit, a truth settled with both comfort and pain. You gave your son on an altar. One day, so will I. Abraham closed his eyes. There were some revelations too heavy to bear. In the days that followed, Isaac began to change. He wasn't bitter, not angry, not withdrawn, just watchful, as if he'd learned that life could tilt suddenly, violently, without warning. Sometimes he would sit beside the sheep watching them with a stillness that didn't belong to a child. Other times, he would walk up small hills, staring at the horizon with the strange confidence of someone who had seen death from very close, and somehow survived. And yet, the bond between father and son grew sharper, honest in a way it had never been. Abraham taught him everything now: how to tend animals, how to build an altar, how to understand God's voice, how to recognize the difference between faith and foolishness. Isaac listened carefully, quietly, often staring into his father's face as if searching for something he wasn't sure he wanted to find. Soon the world changed again. Keturah, one of the servants, brought news from afar. Nations were rising, tribes were shifting, conflicts were stirring, and Abraham, who once walked as a wanderer, now felt the weight of being the patriarch God claimed he would become, the father of multitudes, the root of something enormous and eternal. But every promise God had spoken hinged on one fragile, newly tested life: Isaac. So Abraham guarded him fiercely. One night, long after the camp had gone quiet, Isaac woke from a nightmare, one he had too often. He ran outside, gasping, and this time Abraham followed him. The boy sat on a rock, gripping his knees, breathing hard. "Isaac," Abraham said softly. Isaac didn't look at him. "Why didn't God ask for you instead of me?" Abraham froze. There were many questions he had prepared for, not that one. He sat beside him, the old wood of his staff tapping the ground. "Because the promise rests on you," Abraham whispered. "And sometimes the thing God intends to use, he first breaks, not to destroy it, but to reshape it." Isaac swallowed hard, his voice barely a breath. "Then am I broken forever?" Abraham cupped his son's face, his voice trembling. "No, you are chosen." Isaac leaned his forehead into his father's chest, and Abraham held him tightly, aware that this boy, this miracle, carried a destiny so vast that even he, the father of faith, could not fully imagine it. Time passed. Isaac grew taller, stronger, more confident. Sarah watched him proudly, though she still didn't know what happened on Mount Moriah. She sensed that God had taken her son somewhere she could never follow, and brought him back changed. As Isaac approached adulthood, Abraham began to feel time shifting beneath him. His strength was fading. His hair, once dark, had become silver white like desert moonlight. He began to understand something no prophecy had said aloud. He would not live to see the full promise. But Isaac would. One late afternoon, while Isaac was gathering firewood, Abraham stood on a hill overlooking the camp. God spoke again, not in thunder, not in fire, but with steady warmth that sank deep into his bones. "Through him shall your descendants be called." It was a promise wrapped in certainty. The long story of redemption would flow through Isaac, through his children, through their children, through 1,000 generations. But something else was coming. Something Abraham could not yet see, but felt like distant thunder rolling over the horizon. And then everything shifted. Messengers arrived with devastating news. Sarah, his beloved Sarah, was growing weaker. Her strength had begun to drain, her breast shallow, her skin pale. Isaac rushed to her side, gripping her hand tightly. Abraham knelt beside her, the years between them folding into a single, painful moment. She smiled faintly when she saw them both, her miracle child and the man who had followed God into the unknown for her sake. But behind that smile lurked something Isaac had never seen before: acceptance. She whispered Isaac's name, told him he was the joy of her old age, told him he must live boldly, fully, because she had waited a lifetime just to see him born. Isaac pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm not ready," he whispered. She breathed out a small, fragile laugh. "No one ever is." Abraham took her other hand. "Sarah," but before he could finish, her eyes closed gently, like someone slipping into a peaceful sleep, and the tent fell into silence. Abraham's heart cracked in ways no mountain, no altar, no test had ever done. Isaac began to shake, tears falling freely. Sarah had been the anchor of their home, the laughter in their old age, the living proof that God keeps promises however impossible they seem. Her death felt like the shadow of promise turning cold. As Abraham kissed her forehead one last time, he whispered a trembling prayer. "Lord, is this where the promise ends?" But deep in his spirit, a quiet answer came. Not the end, only another beginning. Because soon Isaac's own story would start. Soon a woman would be chosen for him. Soon the next chapter of the covenant would unfold. And soon destiny itself would take its next step,